Okay. So I'm Lisa Walker from Hyattsville Aging in Place, and I'm really happy to see everybody here this morning, this afternoon. Um, when we started talking about doing this session with Giant Food and Isa Carrizales, we wanted to do it in early January, but since I don't know about you, but I've been breaking my vows to eat more healthily and to not drink the last couple of days. So I think it's a good time to have a reminder. Um, we want to look at a number of topics here: healthy eating, also eating to support your immune system, and as well as sizing recipes to fit, a huge bunch or even, one person household. And we asked Isa to talk to all of those things. Little bit about Corridor Conversations, and I think I'll introduce a couple people here. It was started by our area villages back in COVID, included Hyattsville Aging in Place, Helping Hands University Park. I don't see Linda Verrill here. Neighbors Helping Neighbors College Park, and Arelis is here. I can see her.
Hello and Happy New Year, everyone.
And Explorations in Aging College Park, Bonnie McClellan and Marianne Hakes. Oh, there's Bonnie. Great. So we wanted to provide, sort of fun programs when we are all locked in our houses and during COVID, and we've just continued it as a Zoom meeting because it's easy for people to get to. We are thinking about doing an in-person gathering sometime this spring.
Perfect.
So we're really happy to have Isa Carrizales here with us. She works with Giant Foods as a nutritionist. She's a registered dietitian and a licensed dietitian nutritionist. She was born in Venezuela, raised in Florida, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Dietetics from the University of Florida. She makes Giant's nutritional services accessible for Spanish-speaking customers through classes, consulting, and store tours. And we had a program with Isa a couple of months ago, which is where we met her. And I didn't realize that Giant Foods does all of this. So we will ask her to say a little bit about that as she goes along. She believes in finding balance and intention in everyday living that goes beyond our plates as well. So feeding our body, but also our souls. I'm just going to turn the program over to her. Let us know if you're taking questions right away. We tend to put them in the chat so we don't interrupt what you're presenting.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa and Carter and Edna, who've been part of the whole planning process and meeting with me. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I think this will be a very interesting topic for all of us, not just because it's the new year, so a lot of us are hyper focused on healthy living, healthy eating, right? Healthy behaviors in general. But also it is cold and flu season as well, even though yesterday we got a bout of warmth, so that kind of disrupted it maybe potentially. But we're going to be talking about a lot of relevant topics, I think, to this time of the year, but also hoping that we carry these later into the year when health and wellness is not necessarily at the forefront of our minds because we're at a time right now where it's, marketed everywhere. But hopefully we carry that into the rest of the year as well. So before we get started, let me just go ahead and share my screen because I'm going to be using visuals. I love using visuals. And to address questions, anything that comes up, definitely feel free to put it in the chat. If I do see it in the moment, I'll try to answer it. And if not, we'll definitely make sure that we have time at the end to address any questions that maybe I didn't see during the presentation.
I think also, Isa, that Aminat, our intern, Aminat Ilgandana, who was on the screen before, and I did not introduce her, I will later, but she will be corralling the questions in the chat. So you need to keep your eye on it. Okay.
Perfect. I appreciate that. All right. Let me actually minimize the camera so that doesn't block my screen. Okay, wonderful. And once again, I know Lisa already introduced me, but just really quickly again, my name is Isa Carrizales. I am one of the nutritionists on our healthy living team at Giant, and I am a registered dietitian and licensed dietitian nutritionist. And we are belonging to a team, we're the healthy living team, and we're a team of dietitians essentially. We do a lot of different services, and I will talk about that at the end because I know that a lot of us sometimes are not aware of our team. So I think it's a really wonderful service that we can bring to our local community. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about a variety of topics, actually, but among them, we're going to be focusing on the nutrition part regarding immune boosting foods. And then we'll talk a lot about other topics as well. So let's go ahead and get started with that. If my mouse works correctly, it's kind of blocking. I can't hit next. Why not? Okay, there we go. All right, so this is just a very quick overview of the agenda. We're going to talk about immunity, the immune system, immunity through foods. I'll touch a little bit of why specifically through foods, and also inspiration in the store and in the kitchen. So how you can apply what we're talking about today when you go grocery shopping and also in your own kitchen. And so these are the three different kind of sections that we're going to go through today. All right, so starting with immunity. Immunity is the name of the game right now. I actually myself am overcoming a cold, so while I was working on some of the things I was putting in here, I felt like it was very relevant to my recovery and treatment. But let's talk about first what immunity even is. What is our immune system? So our immune system is essentially the system in our body that protects us against those external invaders that make us sick. And so there's actually different parts of our immune system. So some of it is external, and it starts with the skin. So the skin is just that physical barrier to stop all of those bacteria and viruses from getting in. Then we also have our tears and our sweat. So those are also considered external parts of our immune system. If you, next time maybe you get something in your eye, right? Or even when you are sweating it out, just think about the job that these are doing to protect you from outside invaders. But yes, definitely, these are important parts of our immune system. We also have our respiratory tract. So in here we have little hairs, essentially. We call them cilia, that line our respiratory tract, and these actually catch some of those bacteria, some of those viruses that could be coming in. So they also function to stop these before they get into our circulatory system. And even in our gut, those that also can be trapped before they get in, they can also be caught by structures in our gut so that they don't get absorbed into our circulatory system. Now, once all those fail, so our immune system always has kind of like a plan B. You know, this is plan A, and when plan A fails, it kind of always has a plan B most of the time. So when all else fails externally, we have our internal defense system, and this is mainly our immune cells. So these kick in when those invaders do find a way to get inside. And once they reach the stage of getting inside, they're called an antigen, these invaders. That's how our system identifies them as external invaders. And so essentially, our whole system has a way of identifying these antigens and finding ways to put up these immune responses to attack or get rid of these invading cells, bacteria, whatever they may be. Okay, but another maybe more applicable question is, great, we know about our immune system, kind of the way that it works, but what actually suppresses our immune system? Why does it sometimes not work as well? What can really be impacting us in our day-to-day lives so that we are getting sick sometimes, or that immune system is not really working? So first of all, stress is a really big one. When we're stressed, our immune system and its ability to fight those antigens that the body identifies as external invaders is really suppressed. So this is why a lot of times when we're really, really stressed, we're just way more likely to get sick and way more likely to more prone to those infections. Now, that's why stress reduction, working on that stress is a really important part of working on our immunity. I know this is not nutrition related, but it's still worth mentioning that it's really important to work sometimes on the root causes of things, the side of things that identify why are we getting sick. Maybe it's stress, right? Rather than just focusing on how to treat it once we do get sick. Another one is inadequate sleep. So sleep is the time during which our bodies and our minds really slow down, repair, and heal. So it makes sense that when we're not getting adequate sleep, then we're more likely to get sick. So without that sufficient sleep, really our body makes fewer of these compounds called cytokines. And so cytokines are those proteins that target whenever we are experiencing an infection or inflammation. That's when cytokines are produced and released. And so they're released a lot of times and produced during sleep. So we do need that adequate sleep. The recommendations are between 7 to 9 hours for most people. That can vary in certain groups, but 7 to 9 hours for most people. And it is important also because our bodies do follow that natural circadian rhythm. And so trying to get in line with that circadian rhythm is important as a good way to really help improve on that sleep. Our bodies do get used to certain habits. So sometimes when people are having trouble falling asleep, trying to really regulate that sleep schedule as much as possible is just one of the steps they can take to regulate and get a regular sleeping habit. Now, that's not going to work for everyone, especially some people that may have just different schedules altogether. But when we do tend to wake up and go to sleep around the same time, that can really help. Our exposure to light is also a big participant in our circadian rhythm. So when we're exposed to that natural light, that's when our bodies start to naturally wake up. And same goes for when we're going to sleep. That dim, low light is also going to help as well. That's why being exposed to screens later in the day, closer to our bedtime, is not a very good idea for your circadian rhythms. This is where nowadays we do have an option for our phones to put them, for example, in night mode, because it changes the type of lighting that we're exposed to. But really working on those dim lights closer to bedtime can really help, turning off screens, TV, all of those things. Additionally, moving on, so this is what we're gonna talk more about, but poor eating habits definitely suppress our immune system, especially nowadays. A common problem are diets that are too high in sugar, salt, saturated fats. These can definitely curb that immune system and make it more vulnerable to the attack of viruses, bacteria. So we're going to talk about all the different nutrients, all the different foods. So I won't go into too much detail about that one, but I will talk about the last one, free radicals. So if we've heard about the terms oxidative stress is essentially when we have an imbalance in our body between these molecules that we called our free radicals, so these molecules that are called free radicals are essentially unstable molecules, excuse me. And they actually are necessary in our body to a certain degree. However, exposure to certain things and certain habits can lead to that imbalance where we have too many free radicals. And that leads to that state of oxidative stress that can make us sick, suppress our immunity, make us more prone to inflammation, especially chronic inflammation. And this is also where different types of compounds like antioxidants can really help throw that balance back in. Now, let me see, I just want to make sure. Oh, yeah, I just wanted to check Lisa's note in the chat that says that you can add questions here. Perfect. Okay. And what are the consequences of when our immune system is suppressed, excuse me, or maybe depressed too? Well, that's where we can be particularly at risk of developing both acute and chronic disease. So especially when it comes to free radicals and oxidative stress, that's where we're more at risk of developing those long-term chronic diseases. Also, autoimmune disease, that's where we're also at risk of our bodies essentially attacking itself. And then finally, just a diminished response against infection. So this is when we do get sick because of all these reasons that we're talking about. And then additionally, our immune system is just not strong enough, and it can really lead to worsening of a condition. So for example, maybe common cold can further develop into bronchitis or something a lot more serious because our immune system is just not strong enough to fight it and combat it. So these are definitely the things we want to try to avoid by keeping that immune system as strong as possible. So what are we going to do about it? Among many things. So I'm a dietitian, so I'll talk about the food part. We want to fight it with food. Now we get all this question all of the time. What exactly is an immune boosting diet, right? Does that exist? Is there such a diet that can really strengthen your immune system? Now, there really are certain dietary patterns that certainly prepare your body much better for defending itself against maybe bacteria and viruses and also inflammation. We can talk a lot about that. But what we have also found is that it is very unlikely for a very individual food or nutrient to really provide all the protection that you really need. That's why the most important aspect of an immune boosting diet, it's a balanced diet in general. That's not to say that there aren't specific nutrients that are heavily involved in immunity, and we're going to talk about those. But that's really, in summary, saying that you could take your vitamin D supplements and zinc supplements. You could really load up on antioxidants from a certain type of food. But if your general diet is not well balanced to get a lot of the other nutrients that it needs for proper functioning, then loading up on those specific supplements or very specific foods are not necessarily going to give you that ultimate protection. So that's the foundation for a very well-balanced immune system, a very, very much a balanced diet. That's why I wanted to bring in my plate into this. I don't know if we are all familiar with my plate. If we're not, so my plate is a tool that's developed by the USDA to guide on how to build balanced meals. And so maybe if some of us are not familiar with my plate, we're familiar with the food pyramid. So this is what replaced the food pyramid. It just kind of evolved because they reasoned that the food pyramid, as helpful as it is to show all the food groups in their recommended quantities, right? They realized that we don't necessarily eat in the form of a pyramid. So this could be a very practical tool when just simply glancing at your plate and checking, am I eating a balanced plate? So the premise behind my plate is that it has different food groups. We got our fruits, our vegetables, our grains, and our proteins. And we want to make sure to eat these in different proportions and also in specific portion sizes. So my plate goes over all of these different things. Now, generally, we want to fill half of that plate with produce, so our fruits and our veggies. We also want to fill a quarter of our plate with grains. Specifically a special focus in whole grains, so non-refined grains. And this is important because I do feel nowadays we have a little bit of a fight against carbohydrates in general. So most of our foods that we'll find in the grain section are going to be carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not necessarily bad for us. They're not the enemy, but they are very, very abundant in our modern diet, in our modern dietary pattern, especially refined carbohydrates. So what that means is that we ought to pay more attention to the types of carbohydrates that we're eating and in what amounts we're eating them, rather than simply paying attention to eating carbohydrates versus not eating carbohydrates. So that's why we really emphasize and want to focus on those whole grains that are not refined. And finally, we have a quarter of our plate filled with protein. And when it comes to protein, we want to focus specifically on leaner sources of protein. So sources of protein that are lower in fat. This is because the majority of protein sources, at least of animal protein sources, are high in saturated fats. And saturated fats has been the type of fat that we've seen leads to those higher levels of cholesterol. So in order to reduce levels of cholesterol, reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular events, that's why we are really trying to switch up our proteins to be lower fat proteins, as well as plant proteins too. So I do see that someone recently learned about the power plate. Oh, and you shared a picture, Patricia. Thank you for that. Let's see, fruits and legumes, grains and vegetables. So what I imagine this is probably just like my plate while taking out the animal sources of protein, because legumes are a really, really great source of plant protein. And so here's where we can essentially get all our food groups, but this is more a vegetarian dietary meal pattern, I imagine. But that looks great. This is probably a great dietary pattern to use if that's something that you follow, Patricia. Okay. All right. So now let's focus on those nutrients then. There have been some nutrients specifically that have been shown to be very involved into our immune system in a lot of different ways. So these are the supporting nutrients. We have our vitamin A and C, our protein, which is one of those food groups in my plate. Also vitamin D, iron, zinc, and selenium. Let's go into a little bit of details for some of these. Okay, so first starting with vitamins A and C, I'm gonna kind of lump them together. So vitamins A and C, with vitamin A specifically, this is a fat-soluble vitamin, and that's just important to mention because that means that we do need adequate amounts of fat in our diet to absorb it. That's something else that was kind of fought, not anymore, but a couple decades ago, fat was the enemy. You know, everyone was saying low fat. So fat is actually really, really important. And this is one of the places where we see its importance. Fat is really important for absorbing certain nutrients that require it, such as vitamin A and some of our fat-soluble vitamins. Now, vitamin A, it is needed, among other things, yes, for the immune system, but also for vision, especially night vision, and also for reproduction of cells. So growth in general, vitamin A is very essential for that. Now, I will say, when we're talking about all these different types of nutrients, we always do recommend food first, because supplements is always a good question that comes up, and I will talk a little bit about supplements for some. But supplements, especially a multivitamin, usually can't hurt. It can be a great way to meet the gap on some of these nutrients, especially those that are very common for deficiencies. But we always do want to try to get as much as we can of all of these nutrients through food first, because foods not only give us these nutrients, a lot of times they give us a lot of other great, wonderful compounds that we see, like plant compounds, antioxidants, phytochemicals, fiber. There's a lot of other things that we're getting from foods themselves rather than just the supplement. But that's not to say that supplements can't play an important role, especially when there is a deficiency in place or a reason why it's difficult to meet those daily requirements. But some great sources of vitamin A, we're going to see first different kinds. We see our animal sources of vitamin A and also our vegetable sources of vitamin A that come from carotenoids in general. So we see liver, which maybe is not a very popular food choice, but very, very high in vitamin A. Also different types of fish, eggs, and dairy. All of these are very high in vitamin A. We also have on the plant side our leafy greens like spinach, kale, some orange and yellow produce, like maybe some bell peppers, carrots. If we have heard of the compound beta carotene, So beta carotene is a precursor for making vitamin A in the body. I will say one thing about supplements for vitamin A. So you do want to be wary of supplementation because there is an upper limit that we want to follow. Now, my recommendation is that if you are to take supplements for vitamin A, try to get the supplements that come from beta carotene, so those plant compounds, instead of the vitamin A itself, because our body can choose how much of that beta carotene to convert into vitamin A. That way, we're not at risk of any type of toxicity or taking in too much vitamin A. But another word about supplements, always, 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 no matter what it is, make sure to check with your healthcare provider before taking any type of supplements or including that into your wellness routine, into your regular supplement intake. Just because supplements, you never know if there's going to be any interaction with maybe other medications you may be taking, or if there's any kind of contraindication with certain conditions. So definitely always make sure to check with a healthcare provider before adding any supplements. All right, and now vitamin C. So vitamin C is very important for the healing process. In fact, it is very needed to create cartilage, muscle, collagen. So we actually see it added as a supplement when there's any type of wound healing that needs to happen. And it's needed to make blood vessels as well. It has so many different important needs, and vitamin C is also an antioxidant. So we talk about that antioxidant activity when it comes to free radicals, how those help balance those out in the body so that we don't go into oxidative stress. So vitamin C is also very, very active in that type of progress. I see, is vitamin C destroyed by cooking? Vitamin C is a water-soluble vitamin. So to a certain extent, some water-soluble vitamins especially are going to be slightly lost to the cooking process. That doesn't mean that we don't want to cook any of our foods that contain vitamin C. But yes, there will be some loss of vitamin C during the cooking process. Not enough to where we're going to say, don't cook any of your foods. Especially because I think, well, some people do like a raw diet, but I think most of us would probably much prefer to take in cooked foods, and we may see our intake diminished actually if we had to take everything in raw. But yes, that's a good question. But I would say don't worry about the cooking. Definitely continue cooking your foods, but you may see a little bit of a loss during the cooking process, yes. So where can you find vitamin C? Definitely in citrus fruit. That's probably the more common one that we know. But also bell peppers are a great source of it. Broccoli, strawberries, kiwis. These are all really great sources of vitamin C. And different than vitamin A, vitamin C is actually not stored in the body. So there's not as much of a concern for toxicity like there is for vitamin A when it comes to supplementation, because I do know that a lot of us do take those vitamin C supplements when we're sick. However, do know that when we do surpass that recommended upper limit, not that there's no risk for that toxicity, but it may cause some stomach irritation, some gastrointestinal distress. So just be mindful of that. But we're not going to be as worried as vitamin A with going up over, with that supplementation. All right, protein. We have to include protein here because, first of all, protein is that building block for all of our cells, but that also includes our immune cells. So protein is just essential for so many things. And I guess it is such a broad nutrient. It's one of the major food groups, but just really emphasizing that we really want to be getting adequate amounts of protein, especially as we get older, because what happens is that as we get older, we actually start to lose a lot of that muscle mass. That's really important for not just for movement, right? But also for our metabolism as well. So protein is just essential for anything that requires building new things in our body. Now, it is also very needed for healing and repair. So whenever, let's say we're thinking about a workout, we did a really strong workout and we broke down a lot of our muscle fibers. This is why we recommend to take protein, a lot of protein after a workout to build that muscle mass, because that protein is going to be very needed for that healing and repair of the muscle fibers that were broken down. But same goes for anything like maybe someone that went through surgery, right? And they need to go through that healing process and repair process in their body. Same thing. That any type of process that our body goes through that it needs to heal and repair itself, we definitely need that protein. Now, again, when we're talking about protein, we do want to focus on those leaner sources when it comes to animal sources of protein. So when it comes to maybe red meats, which we do want to include less abundance in the diet, go for lower fat sources of meats. So for example, here we have this ground beef, and this one it's called Laura's ground beef. It's 92% lean. So compared to a lot of other ground beefs, they tend to be like 85% lean. This is a lot leaner. So maybe when you're going for those red meats, try to go for those leaner types. You can find leaner types of meats also for example, pork. Like pork loins are going to be leaner. Lamb is another one of those red meats that tends to be very fatty. So trying to go for leaner cuts of these types of meats. Chicken, turkey, those do tend to be leaner in general, but there will be some versions of them. So for example, we do know that our chicken thighs are going to be a little fattier. And that's okay, but just keep in mind, in general, as a pattern, we want to focus on those leaner types of meats. Then when it comes to dairy, definitely lower fat dairy will be helpful. So lower fat milk, lower fat yogurt will be better for that. Eggs are a great source of protein. And I will say a lot of times we get questions about eggs in general, if they're healthy or not. But eggs are, for us nutritionists, they're a superstar, I will say, like a nutrition superstar. But we have seen that eggs are actually not as bad as they once were made out to be. A lot of people were concerned about cholesterol because that yolk does have a lot of cholesterol. But what we have seen is that dietary cholesterol is not necessarily the culprit in those cholesterol levels. Rather is that saturated fat I was just mentioning that's found commonly in, for example, animal sources of meat. Now, eggs are specifically inexpensive. Most of the protein is found in the egg white. So if someone is concerned about the cholesterol in the eggs, you could always maybe do just one egg and then expand and cook more by adding egg whites. So that's a great way to get more of your protein without so much of the egg yolk. Someone asked, how many eggs can you eat per week? That's a great question. So it's actually been seen that a healthy person can eat up to 7 eggs a week without increase in risk for any cardiovascular disease. So that would be, if you wanted to, let's say, do 2 eggs 3 times a week, you could safely do that. That's not a problem. If you are someone that does have cholesterol problems, I will say definitely get together with either your doctor, a dietitian, and just see what you can, change in your diet to manage those cholesterol levels. Just because sometimes it's very individual. Some people are hyper responders to cholesterol in food, some are not. So that's just really person dependent. What about buffalo meat? Oh, and actually I have a buffalo meat product in there. So buffalo meat will be the same. Actually, I'm not sure about the content of saturated fat in buffalo meat, like the specific comparison to beef. For some reason, I do think it's a little leaner, but I will table that and look it up. But we do have some buffalo meat products at Giant, and I know at a lot of grocery stores in general nowadays, it's a little bit more accessible. So I'm going to look up the content of saturated fat in that. Thank you, Edna. And then can you give us recipes such as sheet pan omelet breakfast sandwiches? Thank you for mentioning that because I don't think did I have a recipe in the last one? I did, and I'm sorry that I'll go back to that. So I am including a couple of recipes throughout this class, and I totally forgot about that. So for example, we have these sheet pan omelet breakfast sandwiches that are super simple to make in one sheet. I have all of the links to these recipes at the very end. And actually, I can actually share a PDF of all these slides. I'm going to try to put it in the chat at the end where you can just click into the links for the recipes. So thank you who reminded me of that because I completely forgot I had the recipes on screen. But yes, so this is one of the recipes that it's super simple to make, the sheet pan omelet breakfast sandwiches. Great for protein. And before I finish off protein, a couple additional things. We also have plant sources of protein. So those are just as great. Some great sources include our beans and our legumes. So different types of red beans, kidney beans, black beans, or maybe some lentils or chickpeas. These are all really, really great sources of protein too. And nuts and seeds in general. These can also be great ways of adding some protein. So when it comes to nuts, we also have nut butters, which makes our repertoire of vegetable proteins a lot easier to add to different types of recipes. I do want to go back really quickly because I want to show this recipe, and it actually has to do with protein too. So this is a blood orange chia pudding. It's got a lot of citrus fruit in there, so that's kind of why I added it for this slide. But also it's based off of chia seeds. So I don't know if anyone here has tried chia pudding before. It's made by just mixing chia seeds with some sort of liquid. So it could be some almond milk or some other type of base. And then you can add different types of flavorings and toppings. And so the chia essentially expand, they swell up, and they become a very thick consistency. Now, chia seeds are also nutrition superstars in the nutrition world. They are very, very high in fiber, great sources of omega-3 fatty acids, and it is also a great source of protein too. So you could even make a case for it for your protein needs as well. And that will also be at the very end in those links that I'm showing. Okay, a quick recommendation for protein. So protein requirements do vary per person. The way to calculate protein needs usually depends on the weight of the person. And so that can be, calculated if you want to get together with a dietitian, or if you even want to look it up online, you can calculate your own needs too. But a very general recommendation that will meet most people's protein requirements, if you aim to get 20 grams of protein at every meal and about 10 grams of protein for snacks, if you have 1 or 2 snacks a day, then with that calculation, you will most likely reach your protein needs. So that's just like a really quick shortcut way of calculating, okay, I want to make sure I meet my protein requirements today. That will most likely meet almost everyone's protein needs. Okay, let's move on to vitamin D. So vitamin D is a really talked about vitamin because, first of all, it's actually one of the most common nutritional deficiencies in the world and in the country, both of them. But vitamin D has so many different roles. It is very critical for our bone health, specifically because it's very crucial in the absorption of calcium and also phosphorus, both of which are vital for our bones. And it's also been linked to reduced inflammation. So we talked about inflammation and how it can lead to developing other types of chronic disease. And also it's been linked to reduced cancer cell growth. So enough vitamin D, as well as controlling infections effectively. But we do know that it's one of those vitamins that we don't tend to get enough of. Now, right now, it's a great time to also talk about vitamin D because we're in winter and vitamin D deficiencies become a lot more likely during the winter time. One of the reasons why is because one of the ways our bodies produce vitamin D is through exposure to UV rays, to sunlight. And so during the winter, when we're getting less sunlight because, well, first our daylight little window is reduced, and also we're inside a lot more often. And so our bodies naturally make a lot less vitamin D because of that. So that's why vitamin D becomes a bit more important during this time of the year. Oh, let me see. I do see a question from here. Can chia seeds be used as an egg substitute for baking? Actually, yes, I have heard this before. I've never tried it myself, so I don't want to say that it's always going to be always going to serve as an egg substitute, because then you'll try it and if it fails, don't hold me accountable. But I have heard that it does work as an egg substitute for binding and for bulking as well. So do give it a try, but I have never really seen it, never really tried it myself, but I think it does work. All right. But going back to vitamin D, what are some ways where we can get some vitamin D, right? Because it is such a widespread deficiency. Well, one of the ways, I mean, I mentioned sunlight, but sometimes we can't always get sunlight. There actually are these little sun boxes lamps. So there's actually a picture right here on screen. And you can buy them on Amazon. They're relatively inexpensive. I think they can cost like $20 if I'm correct, $20 or $30. But this can be a really great way to get exposed to some of that UV light. So some people recommend 10 to 15 minutes just being exposed to it, maybe while you're having some breakfast, or if you're catching up some emails or something, just standing in front of that light can really help with vitamin D production as well. Also, supplements tend to be recommended sometimes during the winter time for the reason of the decreased sunlight exposure. So supplements are a very, very common way of getting enough of that vitamin D, meeting that gap of vitamin D. Again, just make sure always talking to that healthcare provider before adding any type of supplement, but that's a very common way of doing that. And then food-wise, there are many foods that are great sources of vitamin D. So that includes, first of all, many different types of fatty fish, like some salmon, some sardines. These are great sources of vitamin D. Cod liver oil. They're actually, I don't know if they have it here in Venezuela. I grew up with this cod liver oil supplement that was always given to kids. And so it had a little picture of a salmon right on the front, but we never called it cod liver oil. It had a different name. And so I never knew how widespread this was given to all the kids until I grew up. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is cod liver oil. But cod liver oil is an excellent, excellent source of vitamin D. Egg yolks. So I know I talked about eggs and why eating the whole egg is important. Well, that yolk is going to contain not just not just a lot of antioxidants, not just a lot of other different types of minerals and healthy fats, but also vitamin D, great source of vitamin D. Mushrooms also, and nowadays there is such a thing as irradiated mushrooms where mushrooms are exposed to this different types of radiations that increase the amount of vitamin D that they have. So for those, you actually see it on the package. It'll say irradiated mushrooms or something like that. So do look for those if you want to get some more vitamin D. They do apparently have more vitamin D in them. And then finally, fortified foods. That's one way that in the US we've gotten around to help with a lot of deficiencies, including vitamin D. So some common ones include milk and orange juice, and it'll be right on the front of the package, whether it's fortified or not. Okay, let's see. Is it true that older people don't absorb sunlight as much as younger people? I do think this is true. I can't tell you any statistics on kind of like the rates, but it does appear that way, that it's not as effective at absorbing that sunlight or that pathway that happens once sunlight, our bodies are exposed to sunlight and to create that vitamin D. So yes, I can look up more specifics about that though. Yeah. Alrighty. Moving on, and we're going to talk about these last ones. They kind of have a lot of similar sources, but iron is the first one. Iron is not just critical for that production of red blood cells. I think that's what we all know it for. Important for creating more blood, and blood is really important for carrying all the oxygen around your body. But it is also a regulator of immune cells, and we're kind of discovering more and more about this as time goes on. It's a bit more recent discoveries. But yes, it's also important for our immune system. We do see that those that have an iron deficiency, so different types of anemias, are more likely to worsen when they have an infection or different types of diseases. So getting enough iron is definitely a priority for our immune system. And also iron was one of those nutrients that our country has also put more efforts into supplementing in a lot of different products because it has been one of those nutrients of concern for deficiencies. But where can we get some iron from? First of all, just know that there are two different types of iron. There's heme iron, which is coming usually from meat sources, so animal sources, and there's non-heme iron. The difference is important just to know that heme iron is a lot better absorbed than our non-heme iron that comes from plant sources. So heme iron, usually about 25-30% of it gets absorbed from our food. Non-heme iron, we can absorb anywhere between 1 and 10% of that iron. So if we're really trying to get a lot more iron through foods, maybe focusing on those animal sources will be better. Also, some things that can help with absorbing more iron is putting it together with vitamin C. So talking about vitamin C, there's just one of those vitamins that are important for immune support. Eating those two together also increases the availability of iron and absorption of it in our bodies. So for example, if you're eating something that has iron, maybe pairing it up with a glass of orange juice or strawberries or broccoli itself, spinach is itself a great source of iron. This can be kind of like two forces acting together to increase that availability. But here are some sources. One of them, mussels. Mussels are a really, really high source of iron. It's actually one of the highest. Spinach. And this over here, so this spinach is one of the spinach that you can actually just microwave in the bag. And this is actually used in this recipe that I am putting here. This is a pork chop piccata, which will be one of the recipes at the end. And it's a great way. I love eating spinach raw, but I do notice when I microwave it, it's a lot easier to get a lot more of that spinach, just because it's a lot harder to eat the abundance of leaves in one plate. But sometimes I'll eat like half a bag when I microwave it, which is crazy. That's a lot of spinach. All right. Oh, the bisons. I remember you're asking about the bison. There's some bison patties over here that are really high in iron. Actually, bison is higher in iron than beef. So that is one of the differences I do know about beef and bison. And lima beans are really, really high in iron as well. So these are dry. You don't have to consume them dry. You can also consume them. There's canned lima beans, there's frozen lima beans. They all work. And one last thing about iron, if you do have a cast iron pan, it has been shown that our foods do absorb some of the iron from the cast iron from the pans. So if you're trying to increase your iron, you could just make the effort to cook in cast iron because some of the iron will leach into the food. And this is actually a good thing if we want more iron. So that could be a tip that you could include. Okay, then we also have zinc. I think zinc has become more known lately for when we're sick and we maybe catch a cold and want to get better. A lot of times we get recommended some zinc supplements, but that does have some scientific backing behind it. It actually has seemed to work and help us decrease the duration of colds and the intensity of colds. So there is some validity to these claims. But zinc is a trace mineral. Trace mineral simply means that our bodies need it in smaller amounts than other minerals. but it is needed for immunity and metabolism as well. And it is also important for wound healing. So sometimes when there's someone that is trying to heal a specific wound that's hard to heal, they will actually get supplements that have zinc in them. And it's also important for our senses of taste and smell. Actually, one interesting fact is that intranasal, so like the spray nasal supplements for zinc, they have been shown to sometimes partially or permanently kill your sense of smell. So actually, they don't really recommend them anymore. But that's how you can kind of get the story behind, its involvement in the sense of smell and taste. So moral of the story, try to avoid those nasal zinc supplements, sprays. And then what else? So where can we get zinc from? I know that supplements when we're sick are a common way to get it, and that's fine. You can definitely try some zinc supplements if you do have a cold. Talk to your doctor first just to be sure, because zinc is one of those that does have interactions with other medications. Like I know, what are those called? The diuretics are one of them that have a big interaction with zinc supplements. So do make sure you talk to someone before starting a zinc supplement, but you could definitely start taking those if you are sick. They do appear to help. And also, you can get them through food. You can get enough zinc through food. So here, oysters, again, are a really high source of zinc. Some crab as well, different types of red meat in general. So a lot of similarities with iron. And then also a lot of our superstars like legumes. We talked a lot about legumes throughout all these food sources, different types of seeds and whole grains. A note about whole grains, for example. One common concern that we have seen with whole grains is that in legumes and all of these food sources is that a lot of times they contain these compounds called lectins and phytates, and these are essentially part of the plant's own immune system. They try to protect the plant, and so it does make some minerals less available to the body. So sometimes when we're eating certain foods like lentils, if we don't soak them properly or just because they have these compounds, some of the iron, some of that zinc is not going to be as available. And there's ways to get around this. Even the cooking process with high heat and water destroys a lot of these lectins. But another option could also be sprouted grains. If you have heard about sprouted grains lately, the reason why they're so popular is because they do make some of these different types of nutrients more available, like zinc, for example. So if you've ever wondered what they are or where to find them, this is one of them. So Ezekiel bread is one of them. You'll usually find it in the frozen section of the grocery store if you're looking for it. So that's a great one that you can try. And over here we have a recipe. So these are mini crab and shrimp cakes. Out of all the recipes I'm including here, I would say this is probably a more elaborate one. The rest ones tend to be a lot easier. But if you're feeling it, it is a delicious recipe. And you'll get tons of zinc and iron, tons of great nutrients from that one. Okay, and finally, talking about selenium, this may be a less well-known one, but selenium is a powerful antioxidant. So we talked about antioxidants' role in immunity and oxidative stress, but we can see that it helps reduce that oxidative stress in the body and also reduce inflammation. And these are the roles that it plays in enhancing our immunity, excuse me. Now, some great sources of selenium, the two highest, again, we're talking about oysters. Clearly, I think we all need to have something with oysters during this cold and flu season because they're appearing as one of the highest sources of a lot of these nutrients. Also, Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts is known as one of those really high sources of selenium. So here's an example of what they look like when you buy them at the grocery store. Different types of fish like halibut and yellowfish tuna. So here we have some canned tuna, some frozen fish. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to drink some water. Oh, been speaking for too long. I always love to have different kinds of varieties of food in my pantry, so frozen and canned as well, because these are great kind of staples to have on hand that are easy to, for example, defrost. Fish defrost really quickly, so you can kind of put a quick meal together. Canned tuna, also readily available, doesn't go bad very easily. So it's really great to keep on hand to make quick meals that are also nutritious and have a lot of the those important nutrients that we need without necessarily having a plan sometimes or making this elaborate meal that takes a lot of time. So I always like to keep those varieties right on hand. Finally, we also have some seeds like sunflower seeds that are great sources. Eggs, we see those come up and up again. Again, nutritional superstars. And finally, shiitake mushrooms. So there's a lot of different types of mushrooms, but here you can try shiitake mushrooms both in their frozen varieties, if you want to just throw them in some sort of soup or saute them. There's also fresh, but you can find them in different ways. And canned, you can also find them canned too. Okay, now that we went through all those different types of nutrients, I want to bring up some last few things when it comes to nutrition and immunity. One of them is pro and prebiotics. If we've heard about pro and prebiotics, maybe they're kind of what's really, really popular nowadays in the world of nutrition. So these play a really strong role in our immune system. So actually about 70% of our immune system cells are located in our gut. And these pro and prebiotics are really, really important in supporting the health and the diversity of our microbiome in our gut. So our microbiome is essentially it's actually almost called an organ of support now. It's considered an organ because of how big and abundant it is, but it's this collection of microorganisms, mostly in our gut, that play a lot of essential roles in our health. And so some of it is digesting our food, some of it is creating certain vitamins and neurotransmitters, but some of it is also helping regulate our immune system, since so much of it is located in the gut. And so essentially, if we're maintaining good health of our microbiome and our gut, then we are also supporting our immune system. So what are some ways to get healthier, more balanced microbiome? Well, you can do that through probiotics and through prebiotics. So probiotics are essentially actual live good bacteria. So this is friendly bacteria that is used to ferment different products in the grocery store. And so you'll find it in a lot of fermented foods. So some different types of options are, if you've heard of kefir. Kefir is a fermented milk product. It's kind of like a yogurt with a slightly thinner consistency, but it has a lot more probiotic strains. Also, some cheeses, so cottage cheese can have some probiotics too. Just make sure to check that label. Usually, if you want to check if something does actually have probiotics, check the package for it to say live active cultures. And that way you'll know if it actually has probiotics or not. And they're even adding them to a lot of other different types of food. So for example, these dried apricots, they say probiotic right on the front, have had probiotics added to them. So there's just a lot of different probiotics, or where we find probiotics now in the stores, and it can usually be seen right at the front of that package because manufacturers have started to see what big of a benefit it is. And then we have those prebiotics. So prebiotics instead are food for bacteria, and we mainly know it as essentially fiber. So we'll find it essentially in high fiber foods. Fibers, a lot of this fiber goes through our digestive system intact, but then it is broken down by some of these bacteria and microbes in our gut, and they create these compounds that also has seem to be beneficial for our immune system. So a lot of high fiber foods will contain these prebiotic fibers, some specifically good ones. So there's some fibers that are found in foods like onions and garlic and asparagus, like you see up here, and bananas, that's called inulin. And so inulin has been seen as one that is particularly good at growing that beneficial bacteria. So you can get some superpower prebiotics through those. And I see a question, what about sauerkraut as probiotic? Yep, so sauerkraut is another option for probiotic as well. I've actually never tried sauerkraut myself, but I think it's the most common one that people have tried. So I really need to get myself to trying that out. But yeah, you can try sauerkraut. Kimchi is a popular one that's from Korean cuisines. Let's see, tempeh is another great probiotic source if you've tried tempeh before. So there's a lot of different areas in the grocery store nowadays you can find probiotics. Okay. And lastly, herbals. So there are some small studies that show the immune boosting effects of a few of these herbal supplements. So I do want to mention them quickly. They are small studies, so we just want to keep that in mind. And they do seem to, for now, show that there is an effect. So you can try them out if you're not feeling very, very great, feeling like you're getting sick, and see if they boost your immune system, help you fight what you're fighting. But some of these, just know, especially with herbals, sometimes herbals do have a high propensity to interact with a lot of medications. So if you do take medications, sometimes also do that check with your healthcare provider before you take different types of herbal supplements. But echinacea is one of them that has been shown to destroy the flu viruses, but there's still limited research with that. Also, tea catechins, specifically in green tea, and other types of plant compounds like polyphenols that help fight inflammation. These have all been shown to support the immune system and our general immunity. Also, garlic, mostly this has been seen through garlic supplements, but there are active compounds in garlic, which are the ones used in garlic supplements. So that's where we can draw that link to garlic helping our immunity as well. One thing about garlic is that I usually recommend, garlic can be one of those that can take a little bit of time to really cut and open. So sometimes having that little jar of minced garlic can really be helpful to speed up any cooking. It adds great flavor, and it does seem to have a lot of great helpful compounds. But again, still very small studies that have been showing this. And finally, a lot of spices. So spices are antioxidant superstars as well. So certain spices like cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and turmeric have been shown to be really, really rich in antioxidants and helpful in reducing rates of certain cancers, fighting inflammation. So definitely try to load up on those spices because they can have a lot of great health benefits attached to them. Okay. All right, so that's kind of our food tour. And again, like I said, I'm gonna include some of those recipes at the end. Now, this is kind of the second part of not the second, this is the end, but it's a shorter part of our presentation today and our time today. So some of inspiration in the store. So when you're going grocery shopping, a lot of this is particular to Giant, but that doesn't mean that you may not find some helpful tips if you don't shop at Giant. But in Giant, we do have sometimes our meal inspirations. So usually near the produce aisle, you will usually find sometimes some meal inspirations where you'll have the ingredients. Usually there's a deal attached to that ingredient. So for example, this past week, we have a salmon deal where you could get that salmon. And then if you bought it, then you got some green beans, some rice, and a lemon for free, so they could put it all together in a meal. So sometimes you'll see those at the entrance of the store usually, or sometimes also in the deli section. And in some stores, not all of them, you'll see the Healthy Living 30-minute meals also in the produce section. So this is not all of the stores, but this is what they would look like. It'll say easy 30-minute meals. So you'll have all the ingredients that you need in there. Also, Handpicked is one of the programs that we have with our team of nutritionists at Giant. This is essentially products that we work with different vendors in identifying certain products that we support and we think are healthier products. So we partner up with them to promote these specific products. So usually they'll have a label depending if we're partnering up with them, that says handpicked. So this is what it looks like, this handpicked logo. And so currently some of the handpicked products that we have this month include our Triscuit crackers, which are 100% whole grain. Also our Chobani zero sugar yogurt. We also have our microgreens, and this is the kale. So these microgreens comes from AeroFarms, which is vertical hydroponic farming. So that means that there's no need for spraying pesticides, for example, no need for washing either because of this. We also have that tempeh. I mentioned tempeh when we talked about those probiotics. So tempeh is a great source of protein. It comes from soybeans. So it's made by fermenting cooked soybeans. And it is a great add to things like maybe chilies or stews or tacos, because it really takes in and absorbs the flavors of anything that is cooked in. So I love tempeh, but it's a great source of protein too. And then finally, our San Pellegrino sparkling water is flavored with natural flavors, and it has no sugars that are added. So it's a great way of working on your hydration without taking in a lot of those added sugars that are a concern. And in some stores, you will also see our healthy hutch. So it looks like this on the right-hand side. This is available in all the stores actually, and it'll be some picks for usually all shelf stable. So it won't be in the refrigerated area or anything, but all shelf stable products that can be great for snacking or adding to your meals. And finally, we have our smart snacking end cap. So that'll be snack specific, and that is in only some of the stores, not all of them, but it'll essentially promote some healthier snacks. Now, one important part of grocery shopping is sometimes reading food labels. So I want to give you a quick tool that can be really helpful for reading food labels, because sometimes food labels can seem a little bit intimidating or just too much work to do to read every single food label when you're grocery shopping. But this is a really quick tip that can be really helpful. And it only applies to different nutrients that have this percentage on the side. So this is called the 5-20 rule. And I would usually apply it mostly to things like our sodium, our saturated fat, our added sugars. So things that maybe we want to limit, or maybe things that we want to boost, like fiber, for example. But the way that the 5-20 rule works is that if you see the right-hand column, it's called the percent daily value column, you will actually apply the two numbers, 5 or 20%. So if you see anything that's 5% or less, then that means that it's low in that nutrient. If you see anything that's 20% or more, then that means that it's high in that nutrient. So for example, in this label over here, let's kind of apply that to something. Let's say we're doing sodium. We really want to control that sodium. Maybe we are kind of trying to decrease hypertension, right? We're trying to control hypertension. We want to decrease our sodium. Okay, then I want to try to find lower sodium options. So we go to sodium, and instead of looking at the milligrams, which might not mean as much to someone because there's a lot of different numbers to keep in mind, we just go directly to that percentage, and we see that this, even though it says 5 milligrams, it gets kind of rounded down to 0% because it's so insignificant. So we can deem this as a very low sodium product. If this was 1, 2, 3, 4% sodium, then we could still deem this a low sodium product. But then we go over here to our added sugars, and we look at our percentage and we see 46%. Now, that cutoff number for high, it was 20%, right? So this is much higher than 20%. So we can essentially identify that this product, whatever it may be, is really, really, really high in added sugars. And maybe we'll be better off if we find something else that's similar, but a little bit lower in the added sugars, if we're trying to get, a little bit of our sweet tooth in. And then finally in this section, I did want to introduce you to guiding stars. So if you do shop at Giant, or if you've ever been at Giant, we actually have a tool that's a nutritional guidance tool called Guiding Stars, which can essentially do all of that label reading for you so that you don't have to do it. So essentially different types of products all the products in the store, and also recipes from our Savory magazine. They'll go through this evaluation, and they get assigned a net score. So that's based on certain nutrients that we want to limit. So maybe that's sodium or that saturated fat. And also based on nutrients we want to boost, like maybe specific vitamins and minerals and fiber. And then it arrives at a net score. It could be less than 0, so it doesn't get any stars, or it could be 1, 2, or 3 stars. So the more stars, the better, the healthier the food is. And so these stars are put on as symbols on the products. Usually they're found on the price tag of every product. They can also be found online, so in that nutritional guidance area when you're shopping online, or in recipes on Savory Magazine, you can find it on the recipe as well. So this can be just a quick tool that can also be really helpful at making just healthier purchases or healthier selections when you go to the grocery store. Okay, and then lastly, we want to go through some inspiration in the kitchen. So let's go through some inspiration in the kitchen, right? One of the things we want to talk about is that, especially if we are considering empty nesters, right? When there's not as many people in the house, how do we cook for one? What are some tips for actually taking all of these recommendations about food, about cooking, about what we're doing, and how do we make it happen, especially when we're just one person? Because I will say, food waste is very commonplace in the US. Actually, it's been estimated that about 40% of our food produced gets wasted. Now, a lot of that does come from restaurants and essentially larger food production facilities. Not as much does come from households, but there's still a significant amount that happens at home. And I know I'm also guilty of it, so it's not like anyone's better or worse than others. Some are better or worse than others, but here are just some tips that could be helpful, especially when we're cooking for less people, and how to decrease that food waste, how to make sure you're also kind of keeping it varied. What do you do with so much food, especially nowadays? It's harder to buy in smaller portions. So number one, I mean, this kind of maybe goes without saying, but it is the most effective way is by making a plan. We do offer meal planning workshops, so that could be something interesting and fun that you could attend, which really expands a lot more deeply in all of this. But making a plan for everything you're going to be preparing for that week, making plans for different types of occasions as well. So for example, for someone that's really busy all the time, or maybe someone that doesn't have time to always be cooking these elaborate meals, planning for that and not really kidding ourselves into thinking that we have to make these elaborate meals to be healthy, right? So making a plan and making a plan for each ingredient that we're buying, that's all super important and really, really helpful for cooking for one person. But when that fails, right, sometimes we don't have a plan. What do we do? Well, one, we can definitely make sure we have proper storage for leftovers. So for example, does it freeze well? If it's something that it freezes well, then this could be a great way to not have the same meal so many times. And also make sure that it could be a great way to have a meal ready for us at a future time when we don't have a plan either. So finding meals that maybe freeze well, knowing what's the best way of storing them so that they last longer. Because sometimes if we don't store things correctly, they could go bad much quicker. Also, flexible ingredients can be a really, really helpful tool, a really helpful tip. So what else can you make with these ingredients, right? If you haven't planned for it already, maybe you're cooking something and you have a lot of leftover onion or a lot of leftover carrots. Sometimes carrots, we buy them in a lot of really big bags, right? And we have so many carrots left over. So instead of just putting it back in the fridge, immediately think, what's another plan for these ingredients? What can I maybe add them to another food? What's a great use for them? And try to think of that before putting them away. That way you do have a plan for that ingredient and you have something else to do for maybe the rest of the week. Carrots last a long time, so maybe even the week after. So that could be a great way, just finding different uses for those ingredients. Also, when it comes to perishables, try to look for smaller packages. Sometimes there are better deals when things are packaged in larger packages, but if that food goes to waste, then we're not really taking advantage of that better deal. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes we do feel very kind of, we really want to take advantage of that deal when we see it, and we see like this big bag of bell peppers. I don't know, bell peppers sometimes get really expensive, but then they put it in this really large bag and the price per each bell pepper becomes a lot cheaper. But are you going to use them all? That's a good question. Are they going to go bad before you get to use them all? So that's not the case. Maybe just make sure to get your 1 or 2 bell peppers. They could be a little bit more expensive per unit, but you will have a plan to use it all, and that's a lot better, right? And then also have some pantry staples on hand. I kind of talked about this when I was referring to those canned or frozen varieties to have on hand that can be really helpful. But always having some pantry staples can really be helpful when you don't have a plan. So for example, maybe you have a can of beans, and a can of beans can be a really quick way of throwing it into a quick soup or stew, even making a salad. We actually have some recipes on how to make these salads purely from canned veggies. So get really creative with your canned and frozen, because you can make so many great things. And the good thing is that frozen, you don't have to use it all at the same time. You can just use a little bit part of it, put it back in the freezer. Canned, you usually do have to put that in the fridge after you open it, but you still have some leeway on time after you open it. So, all right, our whole grains pasta is really that much better for you. So whole grain is going to be better in terms of it having first more fiber. Definitely, we always welcome more fiber. Fiber is super, super essential for so many different aspects of our health and really beneficial. So, and aside from that, it is going to have a little bit more of that nutrient content, like some minerals, so iron, zinc, like we mentioned, also some more protein as well. So that's going to be a little bit better for our health. However, just be mindful, again, with those carbohydrate sources, those grain sources, portion control is going to be your friend there. So even though it is better, it doesn't mean suddenly we want to have a whole plate filled with whole grain pasta. So it is better, but also portion control still remains important. And I think Lisa is saying, I think my problem is when I look at a recipe for 6 people and I'm 1 person, can I just divide everything by 6? Oh, that's a great question, Lisa. So that segues into my next point, is in talking about adapting some recipes. So a lot of times we do see these recipes that are for this massive amount of people, entire family, and we're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Well, first of all, considering one thing, baking versus cooking. These are important because when we're baking tends to be kind of a science. When we're scaling recipes or changing them up, a little bit of a change can make a big difference. So we do need to be more precise with baking. And definitely when we're scaling recipes with baking, we do want to make sure to be exact. When we're cooking outside of baking, this is not the case. Cooking is, you can be a bit more liberal and experimental in your cooking if you want. So this is where, yes, if you are changing recipes in scale, one way you could do it is you could absolutely always just cut everything by its common denominator. So if you're cooking a recipe that's for 6, you could absolutely divide it into 6 to make just a portion for 1. Keep in mind though that sometimes serving sizes in recipes, they say they're for 6, and that can be different for every person. So 6 in one family could be 4 in another. So when you divide it into 6, maybe you're getting half a serving. So I would recommend, if it's a large recipe for a lot of servings, like 6 or 8, not to necessarily divide it by 6 or 8. Maybe do it into a smaller amount. Maybe divide it by 2 or 3. And you might have some leftovers after that, but you can rest assured that you won't have too little. And that's the important part. The other thing, you can always use a tool. So I'm actually putting a tool right here. This is from Whetstone, which is a food service, essentially, website, but it can be really helpful for using at home as well. So you can click on it. I'll try to share those slides so you can click on it, and you simply put in the ingredients amounts that the recipe says, and you then put how many servings you want to make. And then it gives you all the conversions that you can use right at home. But keep in mind those really large recipes for large serving sizes, to not divide it into too little either, because that can be a problem. And then here are also some common conversions to have on hand. So if you want to keep these slides, a copy of these slides for you, these could be really helpful to make some quick math. So, 1 pound, 16 ounces, 1 tablespoon is equal to those 3 teaspoons, 1 pint being 2 cups, a quarter cup being 4 tablespoons. So these are some good ones. There's more, of course, but these are some main ones that I will say. Try to memorize these, because these will be really, really helpful when converting things when you're doing recipes. And finally, another thing that can be really helpful when you're adapting or thinking about recipes and their sizes is the actual serving sizes that are recommended in general for different groups. So the first one is for protein. Usually a general recommended serving size for protein is between 3 and 4 ounces. And so think about maybe when you're getting a recipe in pounds, right? 16 ounces is 1 pound. And when something calls for 2 pounds of a specific type of meat, let's say, then you're saying, oh, okay, with 1 pound, I'm going to be getting like maybe 4 servings from 1 pound of food, right? So that's kind of a way you can use your conversions and this common knowledge of knowing how much is in 1 serving to really get an idea of how many servings you may be getting from something and how you can scale that down. Same with grains. Grains, usually that serving size is going to be 1 ounce. And 1 ounce is going to be equivalent usually to 1 slice of bread, half a cup of cooked grains, like half a cup of rice, half a cup of pasta. That's a 1 ounce serving. Or also 1 cup of dry cereal grains. So any type of dry cereal. And so for that, those are also really helpful in understanding those serving sizes when you see, this recipe makes, 3 cups cooked rice. And it's like, okay, how much usually should someone eat when it comes to cooked rice? Well, now usually a serving size is about half a cup cooked rice per person. So this could be really helpful in just keeping these in mind when you're making adaptations to different recipes. And I hopefully we'll have time. But the last thing I want to talk about is just some inspiration for recipes, especially during the winter. I know, for example, a common thing to do is getting some root veggies, right? And those are very durable and stable. So there's not a lot of things in season during the winter. So we rely on our root veggies that are sturdy. But sometimes it's a question of how do I utilize these ingredients? But I'll give you 2 recipes over here that it's also in the list at the end. But 2 ways that you could use with mostly all of root veggies. One of them, you can roast them. 400 degrees Fahrenheit in your oven, or even 425. Leave root veggies in there for 40 minutes, an hour, or sometimes even more, especially if you cut it into larger pieces, not so small pieces. And you can roast practically anything with different types of seasonings. Mix it together. So for example, this roasted root veggie medley, which is one of the recipes that I'll share with you. And that's a way to create a side for any type of food that you're having, especially with some sort of different types of meats. This could be great if you're mixing with different types of maybe lentils. Mix them together with this. Those are also some great combinations as well. But your seasonings will be your friends. So definitely make sure to add some seasonings. Try different things out. Rosemary, garlic, oregano, Italian seasonings, or even when we're talking about some squashes, some sweeter type of seasonings like some cinnamon, some cloves, maybe some nutmeg. These are some great seasonings you can try. Your seasoning is going to be your friend. The other thing you can also do with a lot of root veggies is make them into soups. So this is one of the recipes I'll be sharing. It's a curried carrot ginger soup. If you're not a fan of curry, you can leave that out. That's totally fine. But just you can usually boil them, and after you boil them, you put them into a blender, or if you have an immersion blender, even better. But not all of us have those, and create a mix of different flavors from these root veggies. Again, seasonings will also be your friend here, along with some nice chicken broth or vegetable broth or something as a base. So these are some great ways that you can use a lot of your root veggies very easily. And we actually might not have time for this, but this is the last thing I wanted to show. It's just a little bit, I had a few videos on how to cut and handle some of these different types of veggies. So these are the 5 that I chose for today. So I don't think we'll have time for that, but it's the very last thing we had. The butternut squash. We also had the turnip, some ginger, some beetroot, and fennel. But these will be in the slides, so you will have them. You will have access to them. One tip about some of the harder to cut veggies. So for example, butternut squash can be a hard one to cut. One thing that I do, I put it in the microwave. I wrap it in some paper towels or even sometimes a dish towel, put it in for 3-4 minutes, and that makes it so much softer and easier to cut. So that is something that I actually always do with my squashes and my pumpkins, because those can be tough and they're really big. So when you're trying to toss around a knife, and you can just, it's rough to do that. So that's a recommendation that I have for you. Oh, tunnel. But that is it for today. Here are those resources. I will share. Let me try to put those slides right in here. Let's see if I can do this. Let's see. Screenshot? No. File. Okay.
Isa, if you send a PDF to us afterwards or send the deck to me afterwards, we can send it
share
out
with
to
everyone?
everybody when we share the video.
Perfect. Yes, that'll be that. I'll do that. I'll see if I can throw them in here, and if not, I'll definitely make sure to share it with you. So here's this one. If it doesn't work, then I know that Carter will share with everyone else. But here are all those resources. I also included a video. This is a YouTube video called How to Chop Every Vegetable. It actually goes over how to chop almost every vegetable in existence. So I love that video. Definitely make sure to see that. And I also had some information about guiding stars if you want to learn more about them. And then that's it for today. So this is our contact information for our team. I want to thank you again for joining today. I do hope that you enjoyed it. I did kind of go over time. I apologize about that. Sometimes I get excited about some of these things and talk too much. But just to tell you really quickly about our team, we are a team of dietitians, like I told you about, that work at Giant. We offer different services and resources. So we do nutritional consultations. We can also program to do store tours while we go out to a store near you and do a tour with you. We do a lot of classes and have on-demand recordings and videos. We have a podcast, and we also have social media with different types of inspirations and videos and things like that. So you can get into touch with us through all of these means. So here's our email, our website, and our different types of handles for social media and our podcast. But yes, definitely feel free to get in touch with us. All our services are free for our community. So if you wanted to do a store tour or you wanted to do a consult with us, you can book those or schedule those for free. And thank you so much. I hope, yes, I'm glad you found it very helpful and useful and informative. Thank you.
Isa, why don't we see if anybody has any last questions, because we are sort of at the end of the hour. And there may be some, I think it was really helpful, and the slides are going to be terrific. So we will send those out. if people can't
Perfect.
capture them from the chat. So are
Wonderful,
there
yes.
any remaining questions? Can we go back to the main screen, Carter, do you think, or what do you think?
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah. Yep, no problem. Let's stop. There you go.
I want to just see if.
So she covered every questions that were asked.
Yes, so I want to, can you put your screen on, your video on, Aminat, so people can just see you? I want to introduce you, which I didn't do in the beginning. Where are you?
Oh, there she is.
You're right there. So this is Aminat, Aminat Ogundana. She is an intern with us until August. We hope to have her at many of our programs, and she was given a task to do the questions, but Isa has answered them all. So if anybody has any remaining questions, please let us know right now.
Yeah, but thanks, Aminat, for keeping track of that. I do
Welcome.
if I can try to answer them in the moment, so.
Is somebody saying something? Has a question? Because you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
I have one question, please.
Okay.
Is it safe to freeze red bell pepper?
Red bell pepper, yeah, you can chop it off before freezing it or not. You don't have to, but I find it helpful to chop it off right before because that way, when you want to use it, it's already prepared for you. But yes, you can definitely freeze some red bell pepper.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Are there any other questions at this point? I see a no. I don't know. I think I see Malka's Mini seems to be shaking her head, but I don't know. Well, why don't I just say, well, let's keep watching to see if anybody has them. Let me just say that I want to really thank Isa for doing this, and we will send these slides out probably in a week or two. Just want to tell you about upcoming sessions next month on February 24th, which is also a Saturday at 2 o'clock. We have Dr. Dennis Doster, who is the Black History Program Manager with Park and Planning, who will talk about the long road to civil rights in Prince George's County, which took quite a while. I don't know if you were a resident here then, but the schools didn't desegregate until 1972, and there was quite a fight over it. So, and I'm sure there are other issues that he will bring up. And then in March, on the 23rd of March, we have Dr. John Mayer, I hope that's the way he pronounces it, who's a Nobel Prize winning astronomer. He'll be doing a thing called Our Eye on the Heavens about the Hubble telescope. Was it the Hubble? Anyway, and we hope to have an in-person meeting later this year, maybe in the spring when the weather is good and maybe outside. So if there aren't any more questions.
Oh, and from what I could see really quickly, I did see that yes, bison is naturally a leaner option for meat than beef. So that is going to be naturally leaner. Usually it is also going to be, in general, all our bison does come from more grass-fed type of animal rearing. And it does seem to have a more favorable fatty acid composition, so meaning less saturated fat content. So it does seem to be, I didn't look at it deeply, but from what I can see on the surface, it does seem to be a more favorable type of meat for cardiovascular health, at least.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isa.
Lisa, I love recipes.
Oh, yeah.
So this was very helpful. Very, very helpful.
Great. Yeah, you'll get some good soup and other recipes.
Oh, love it.
I thought that pork piccata looked really good too.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes, that did look good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've tried that one. It's really good.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
I don't want to we're over time, so I don't want to hold people necessarily. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Isa,
Thank you.
for being here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.